So, hey everyone, I'm going to be talking about refactoring CSS. So my name is Anna, and I've been a front-end developer for around 13 years, and I work at Hacktor. We are an agency that specializes in Wagtail CMS, and we really dedicate ourselves for tech for good projects. I love the indie web. That's my personal website, and my life has completely changed since I've created it. Come talk to me after, because I will convince you to have a personal website, trust me. And when I'm not poking it, I'm probably doing some DIY. I've recently bought our first family home, an old Victorian home, and I've been the project manager, the interior designer, and the handy woman in it. So I'm going to take you on that journey as it got renovated, or shall I say refactored. And I found really similar struggles. So if you are going through a house renovation right now, this is going to be very triggering. I'm so sorry. I've been given that feedback last week that someone said I checked out halfway through your talk because it brought me nightmares. And I was like, yeah, I'm so sorry about that. I didn't realize. So I'm going to talk about my recent experiments in refactoring CSS. And this thought came to my head after I returned to work after a maternity leave 2 years ago. And it was a year that coincided with massive changes in CSS, lots of new features coming out, and I'm still catching up on even now. So I was always wondering, wow, what is the latest approach? How do you build a hero nowadays? What about a card? And what had the experts written while I was away? I was terrified. I wanted to read everything, consume everything, and I was so afraid of making a mistake. And I had this overwhelming pressure to prove that I still had it, and becoming a mother hadn't changed my technical abilities or diminished them. So my return to work became really miserable. And I was terrified, I was constantly afraid, and the blank canvas that once excited me now left me anxious and riddled with decision paralysis. And I'm talking about both CSS and the new home. I felt the same when picking colors for my new house. I took weeks to decide because I was so afraid of making the wrong decision. My family reassured me, oh, it doesn't matter, you can paint it over if you pick the wrong color, but I just couldn't see it that way. In my mind, I was losing money, I was wasting time. But when I was assigned maintenance tasks or small features at work, small features in addition to existing projects, I felt a big wave of relief. The scaffolding was already there, the major decisions had been made for me, so I could make incremental changes and based on the new knowledge I had acquired, and those constraints were limiting, they were liberating. I felt the same when looking at my home. The empty living room with stripped carpets, exposed floorboards, and bare walls really terrified me, and I was worried so much about it, and it was such a big mess, and I had to choose where to place electrical outlets, and I was terrified. But in the kitchen, I had accepted that I couldn't really fully renovate because of time and money, so I looked for quick improvements. For example, I replaced all the cabinet handles to match the existing countertops. And they were a bit used, grimy, and dirty. To be fair, this picture doesn't sell it. Trust me, there's a rubbish. But, it's the black ones, just in case you're wondering. The black ones are the new ones. But replacing them made everything feel brand new. It was a small improvement that, to me, made a big difference. So with legacy code, I had a baseline for comparison, a tangible measure of improvement, and when I made a change, I could see the before and after, and giving me a lot of confidence that my work was valuable. And there was something deeply satisfying about this incremental progress that building from scratch couldn't really provide. And maybe it's psychological, maybe it's all in my head, but what once prompted signs of, oh, what a pain to work in that project, now gets me excited because I know I can make it better, and I can clearly see the value I'm adding. So I work in an agency, and many of you might be freelancers, independent developers, or at other agencies, and you understand that we're not always building something from scratch. Even in product teams, you may work on internal tools that were built many, many years ago, and you're not always jumping from project to project, building something from scratch with the latest new technology, giving into the CV-driven development. And it's very unlikely you're building a new home from scratch as well. And I'll make it clear that this talk is not about dissing legacy code bases and that you should be really keen to refactor once you inherit one. And I could wrap up really quickly if I only just said, just implement a design system and move on. But it's not really about that either, because smaller organizations have serious budget constraints. And it's very easy to say, let's just rebuild it from scratch, trying to convince them, but it's not their budget reality, especially in today's economy. And the reality of CSS maintenance is that it just works. It often just works without requiring a lot of attention. And CSS has evolved significantly in recent years with so many new features, but the website built 8 or 9 years ago won't be using these, and it still works. But legacy CSS can document product decisions, really undocumented product decisions, really. When you inherit projects built by someone else, whether you're an agency or a freelance or in a product team, you have a lot to figure out. And we all want to live in a world where everything is perfect and documented and there's a design system and a dedicated team for the design system, but that's just really not it. The reality is very, very different. The code that is live is your documentation. For example, it may have specific features or specific accessibility concerns, which means that the product has to fundamentally work for a specific group of people, which should be the default regardless, and that probably isn't explicitly written anywhere. An example we quite often forget about is print style sheets. At Hacktar, we work with a lot of charities that provide support for a variety of illnesses. So imagine a website that informs people about a certain illness and provides recipes for meals to manage that condition. People will want to print those or print helpful notes to take their GP or questions to take to their GP because they feel overwhelmed with the illness they have and they need notes and things like that. Or projects with high team turnover, where the moment someone leaves and another one joins, they have a brand new vision that clashes what currently exists. Very small organizations may not have the sophisticated documentation systems because they're typically overstretched, overworked, and have zero money. This is a photo of my floor once I ripped the carpet. I took this photo when we removed the carpet, yeah, and the builders left some documentation behind. Danger! Maybe pipes. I didn't find out. I just put new carpet on top of it. The code is often the only place where you'll see the constraints that developers faced when they were dealing with it. And you'll probably see comments saying sorry, or this is due to time constraints. And we've all been there. We all want to hand over code that is the best code in the whole world so that the other developers in your competition feel very impressed and stuff. I don't know. We all do the best we can with the time we have, with the circumstances we had at the time. So what motivates a CSS refactoring? Normally, it happens as a consequence of performance or accessibility sprints because they have measurable before and after results, sometimes due to brand redesigns or visual identity changes that don't necessarily require rebuilding the website from scratch. Sometimes some tools, especially if you're using CSS in JS, actually get discontinued and then you're stuck. Or when adding new features, you may find problems like inheriting unexpected styles. So when I think about a CSS refactor, I mostly think about projects that we inherited where adding new features became incredibly painful and time-consuming. So I'm mostly going to focus on this one. If you ever think you ever swept under the rug CSS crimes, think about putting a fuse box underneath the staircase, which is what my previous owner of my house did. So trust me, your CSS crimes are fine. This cost me a lot of money to fix. It was a really bad day. I inherited a house, and you may inherit a code base built by someone else. So let's go through a high-level audit of see what we're dealing with. And auditing CSS is hard. Styles cascade and interact in complex ways aren't really immediately obvious, and the visual nature of CSS makes things very likely context-dependent. And what you perceive as a flaw might actually just be your opinion. And remember, you're not fixing something broken, it's working already. So that makes issues very difficult to spot. More often than not, when I approach a CSS audit, I have to forget about the shiny design system that everybody talks about, because if it does exist, it hasn't been touched since it was originally designed, signed off, and built. We need to forget about it. But the good news is that nowadays, the code base doesn't stray too much from this pattern. You'll likely, even for small organizations with large websites, you'll almost find a main file that imports a bunch of components like base variables, utilities, and things like that. So the structure doesn't normally stray too much from this, which is why after a while, when you're screwing through it, all the code seems quite sensible and it becomes really hard to spot issues. And when you have zero documentation or zero style guides, you need to start by figuring out how many components exist, what features make up the website. And if you have files like that, it gives you a sense of how many components and features you might be dealing with. But nowadays, I can spot a few glaring issues a bit more quickly. like multiple selectors to fix specificity issues. I said specificity correctly the first time. I'm so, woo! What a day. In this case, the code base was constantly overwriting the styles for a H2 because they were set at a high level, but then depending on the type of article, they need a new styles. And at this point, you're just like adding and adding and adding and increasing specificity of it. Excellent, 3 times in a row. I was recently looking at a code base that had a lot of supports for CSS grid, which immediately gave me a timeline of when of the code might have been built. Because by the way, we had no Git history, and this happens. Sometimes you inherit code and they just send you a zip file. That's it. You have no concept of what happened, no history whatsoever. And grid has been baseline for a very, very long time, which means there's a lot of cleanup to do. And if we don't pay special attention, we might be adding new code in the wrong section on a bit that doesn't include the grid bit. So it's not going to be visible for nearly anyone. And I still find IE11 targets too. It's incredible. I was like, oh, going back in time. I know with this particular example is actually in SAS. It tells me that conversations need to be had with product about what are we doing, what is supported, and testing. There may be a specific reason why this code exists that I'm not aware of. If you keep finding that inside many components, there's a margin or a padding being reset, it may be that something on a higher level has gone wrong or it's just really no longer suitable. And now it's constantly being reset rather than tackling the issue at the source. This is what, one time I had this code that I was looking for something called accordion __ title, which I could see in the markup, but I could see in the browser that had styles. But when I tapped accordion __ title in my VS Code, nothing returned. I was deeply confused about it. So what's happening here is that, using SAS again, they stored the current parent selector accordion in a variable called root. And then that root variable can be used when nested, and it avoids hard coding that class name, which again, I'm sure there's really helpful scenarios where this is particularly useful, but I'm kind of more of the type that I prioritize readability and easier developer experience over this type of optimization, which again, it works, it's fine. But what he told me about this code base was that if I am to search something just by their class names, I won't trust my search results anymore. And it's going to be quite a certain task. And I'm going to be quite doubtful if I'm done with the task or not. Another bits you may pick up on are outdated layout approaches that can be replaced with modern CSS features only if there's a problem. Only if they're a problem, really. Performance improvement, accessibility concerns. Nowadays, you can, for example, for the content attribute, you can actually add alt attributes to it. Another thing you'll notice as you scroll through the code is probably media queries and responsive behaviors that add layers of complexity that are not immediately visible. And they are incredible documentation, because how often do you go through your code base and you see, oh, if you're on this specific resolution, don't show anything, probably with a display none or something. That's product documentation that probably doesn't exist anywhere else. But it is a decision that was deliberately made there. Or you can pick up on use styles or identify duplicates or near duplicates that can be merged. This is the bane of my existence. This device is called a moisture meter reader, or whatever it's called, moisture reader. They use it when you buy a house. There's a surveyor that comes over and sticks that into your wall and to check for damp. But this thing might shout if your wall definitely has water damage, or it may shout if your wall is actually fine. It will shout differently in winter. It will shout differently in summer. And I hate it. And which brings, and it's a tool to audit your house, that's fine, but which brings me to automatic audit tools. During your own audit and data gathering for your CSS, you'll probably use certain tools, and this is not a brand new topic. There's been tools in and out in the last 10 years, and I'm going to highlight the ones that I like the most nowadays. And these are probably the ones that are most active and maintained, and I actually quite find them really helpful. So Project Wallace does what it says in the package. You can use this on your browser or on your CLI, and it tells you what it thinks about your complexity, specificity, yes, performance of your CSS. And CSS stats is also a really fun one because it includes the spacing resets check, which is like, as I mentioned just before in the other slide, it's something I personally look at to see if I have a big number of paddings and margins being reset, because it gives me a high-level overview of how much of a big issue is it. But I gave this talk 2 weeks ago at CSS Day, and the creator of Project Wallace was there, and they added it for me. So now you can go to Project Wallace, and it actually shows you all the spacing resets, and they go through checking importance and a bunch of things like that. So it's my tiny achievement of the past 2 weeks. So yeah. In Chrome DevTools, there's a simpler overview of your CSS, and I've had some shaky experiments with this. But since it is integrated in the browser, you can actually click through the stuff that it mentions, and it takes you straight to your element and where it's being used. And it checks for things like colors, fonts, unused, declaration, and media queries. And also in Chrome, you can have a quick look at the coverage tool that returns an overview of unused JavaScript and CSS on a loaded page. And it looks like you can go a bit further. I believe you can automate this with Puppet, actually scroll through your whole website and give you this information, which is a lot to process on, to be fair. It's quite a chore. I tested this on my website. It tells me that 64.8% of my CSS isn't used on the home page, which, yeah, it's true. Well, my personal website is not a bank, it's not an airline, so I don't really have to worry about this. So I'll get there one day, maybe, who knows. It's a quite interesting quite an interesting tool to use. And in Firefox, I quite like this view of the style editor where it lists all the @rules found on your CSS. Again, CSS loaded. And by looking at my own website, I immediately spotted too that I could use some review and update. I don't remember doing them, to be honest. My website is really old, so yeah, I have to go back after this and maybe delete them because I don't think they're useful anymore. But when I use the same tool on a real website, my website's a real website, but when I use this on a client's website, it tells me a more complex story. And again, this may be really necessary. Are you moving? Yeah. This may be necessary complexity or a sign that the designs were very strict and fluid layouts were not applied there. And you can see the support for grids, and yeah, there's a lot going on there. But different brains process things differently. The same website using different tools. That's on Google Chrome. What they do is that by default, they put all the same, every time there is the same media query, they put it all together. While Project Wallace gives you the options to sort by source order, sort by count, or sort by alphabetical order. So it's really up to you how your brain processes it, how it works best for you. Similar to what Jack said, when you run a CSS automated audit, the high numbers in reports can be really alarming, but this can be really appropriate for your project. If an audit flags that you have 100 different colors without knowing any context or the purpose of these colors, it doesn't give you a lot of information. It doesn't mean anything is wrong. You could be using an online shop. They need to catalog all these colors, so it doesn't really matter. And you might be dealing with a website that just really needs all of those. And also, it includes colors used in SVGs, which is not entirely helpful. So these raw statistics don't really capture the nuance of intentional design choices, and even assuming that specificity data is useful, tools cannot distinguish between necessary complexity, technical debt, and sometimes you need complexity to override third-party libraries like cookie banners and chatbots and all that stuff to make it look like the brand. So, right. So after you feel like you've had a sense of the code base you're dealing with, and you have a lot of high-level notes, technical notes of things you might want to tackle, let's consider the practical next steps. I would recommend with documenting low-hanging technical debts in tickets, label the quick wins for Momento, and ask questions. And these can be questions about browser support, roadmap, known problems, and just really document them. Every day, someone shares something really cool done with the newest CSS features. And if it's something that gets you excited and it would be perfect for future projects or existing projects, make it visible to everyone around you. You can spin your own baseline status and add the things you cannot wait to be safe to use and make it part of your toolkit. Google recently announced this handy tool called Baseline Checker, which should help you be even more specific to your projects by allowing you to upload your analytics. And this is great for me because the websites and the demographics I normally work with may use older devices. So just because it's a brand new thing doesn't mean I can actually use it at work, and I'm not gambling that. One of my baseline wish lists is the text box trim, but It's not available on Firefox yet, but this is actually one that is already safe to use. So keep that in mind and check it often. And every time you learn something, just add to it and see where you can use things safely. Once I realized the quote to do up all the rooms was more than I could afford, I was kind of forced to scale back. So I decided not to work in the kitchen, as you know, and the bathrooms. And because they were clean and functional, it was fine, I can live with it. And my contractor told me something that I thought was very interesting. They said, you should wait anyways, live in it and find the pain points. Because then you'll know what you want, what isn't working, and what works for your family and your routine. So low-hanging fruits and glaring issues are great motivators to start conversations and feel motivated to just improve your code. But like we know, CSS just works. And it'll take some time to fully grasp how much impact the legacy code is having on your developer experience until you actually work on it. So this may take a while, which is ideal if you're not a freelancer or a contractor brought in to work in a specific timeline. But a bit like a therapy session, ask yourself a few questions and document them. What is causing me to take longer to make a change or add a new feature? What normally comes back as a bug after we work on this code base? What do I dread to touch? Could anyone arrive to this project and make this change? Is it a real problem or is it just not done to my taste? Feels like a children's book, like things rhyme a little bit. So I thought I'd share some real life examples of pain points I've experienced recently. So this is example number one. Whenever we add a new feature that allows some rich text to be added via the CMS, the utility class the project currently uses adds extra margins to the container as well as to all the paragraphs. This means that lots has to be reset every time a new feature, especially if only one paragraph of text is added. Another example, the new spacing guidelines are very different from the existing ones in the code base. Whenever we add a new feature, it inherits the existing spacing and we have to overwrite it to match the new designs. The same template is being reused for multiple differently styled cards and we have to go in deep in specificity. It takes time to make sure we're changing the correct thing. In my last example, there's a lot of unnecessary code. Nearly all the code is written inside some supports, which are now baseline. Whenever we make changes to that code, we need to pay extra attention to where we're adding it. So we need to discuss how to talk to product people, and they want to know why they should be giving you the time and money to make these changes. Now, it can't be just for your own vanity. So I'm going to use product owner, but this is just to refer to whoever calls the shots. This could be head of digital, it could be a delivery manager, it could be a BA, it could be any other name, but it's whoever calls the shots of what's being worked on the website. The wonderful Jerry Reed is in the audience, and this is a quote from her talk that is mostly dedicated to design systems, but I believe it really applies here, and I'm going to read it out loud. Actual design systems return of investment is scalability, collaboration, speed, and cohesive brand. You can't guess how much money your design system saved you, but product people like that, though. They love a number, they're obsessed with that. So you need to make a business case, and product people are tasked with delivering experiences that make money, or at least don't lose money. We need to connect refactoring to solving specific business problems, and we have to demonstrate how this technical debt creates real business impact and document the before and after developer experiences. And metrics like reduced file size and faster loading times, it's great, but it's not enough. Again, back to Jack's talk, which is a great example. Like if you have a website that's primarily visited by people on fast desktop connections and with a great machine, they will not make a significant business impact. You need to highlight specific pain points that genuinely need addressing. So when you enhance the code base for developer experience, the value takes a lot of time to materialize because it's rarely immediately obvious that there were good things coming from it. Because maybe the next task you had to work on was going to be a quick one, regardless if you did the refactor or not. And it takes a lot of time and money to improve documentation, which may be primarily for yourself if you're working alone, which doesn't really yield obvious rewards. I love this blog post. This is an incredible blog post, and if you worked in a very big company, this is the realest thing you'll ever read. If a bug fix isn't tied to a specific requirement or feature, it gets labeled as tech debt and shoved to the bottom of the backlog. And let's be honest, tech debt is corporate speak for we'll deal with this never. So can you convince the product owner to refactor a dormant website? Probably not. And they'll ask you, how do we get the money back from investing your time doing this? Can you answer that? Probably not. But what they also want to know is how does this mitigate risk? And risk can sound like, if you don't do this very annoying thing can happen, and it will delay many other things. Now, this is a rare occurrence with CSS, but if you have specific development pain points, this is the time to address them. So let's imagine a time in the future where carousels with CSS are baseline and a fully accessible feature. They're great. It's the best thing that ever happened. And you've got a website that every once in a while gets new features added, but it's basically stable, and you only get a few allocated hours to work on it every month. It has a maintenance budget type thing. And that website actually has some carousels all over it, and the content editors can add one carousel per page if they want to via the CMS. And that carousel was built many, many years ago using a third-party library. And this is you. You love the craft, you thrive on doing the best you can, and you find yourself itching to go back and improve things as you learn more, but it's not your personal website. And we've all got bills to pay. And if you work in an agency, trust me, they don't want you to work for free. And if you work in a product team, again, trust me, the product person has a lot of other things in their priority list that they would rather you do. So how could this conversation go? Let's attempt to convince our product owners to, in the future, replace the carousels. Hey, so you know how we use these carousels on the website? I think we should replace it with CSS carousels. Here's an example. And they come back with you, not even A, they'll be like, no, I'm joking, that's not true, they're very nice, sorry. What is wrong with the current implementation? And you'll be like, oh yeah, well, it works, but it's using a third-party library, and it's always good to delete some code and remove reliance on JavaScript. I mean, this would work on me if I was a product person, which is why I'm not. I would just waste all the budget on quirks. This would work on me, but no, that's not reality. But this is so they could be like, is the third-party library still being supported? And you have to be honest. So maybe, well, I checked the repo, it hasn't been updated in a while, but I guess there isn't a reason to. And they'll be like, well, I'm not sure that's where we should be focusing right now since it works. But this is the opportunity to mitigate the risk of a third-party fallout. Context dependent, of course, but what happens if this third party stops being maintained? What if it's bought? What if it suddenly changes the pricing plan? What if it starts injecting unwanted code? So moaning, yeah, that's not gonna cut it, trust me, I've tried. And if they entertain the idea, they may ask a few more things. These are examples of questions you have to be prepared to answer, regardless of the feature you're trying to convince a product person to refactor. Are we limited with how it looks like? Is UX improved? Does it feel more native? Does it unlock any new features? Can we reproduce the exact same design? They love that one. Let's try again. Hey bestie, so I learned about this web feature, and now that it's safe to implement, I think we should use it on this component we have on our website. We've been pretty good with accessibility overall, and refactoring this component to use something that we know is accessible will increase our confidence. I agree. Sometimes a good selling point can be, if we do this, imagine we can make a website go from 90%, I know it's wild to say this, 90% accessible to 100%. But that may not be a convincing argument if your website's just really not accessible at all. It's not part of the culture of the company, and only this feature would be. But it may be the upsell, especially a number, because product people love numbers, we know that. So this will help mitigating the risk of accessibility standards increasing. Again, last attempt, because this one might work. This is the one that I used to force it, that I would use to force it. So you may work somewhere that allows you to spend time on personal development or projects that are work-related. So you may go like, hey, so since we have some hours per sprint for personal development, I learned about this web feature, and now that it is safe to implement, I think we should use it on this component we have on our website. I would like to spend my time this upcoming sprint experimenting with it. And by the way, if your employer is paying for your ticket today, going back and having time to implement the things you learned throughout the day is part of the job. So this is normally a good argument that I would use. But let's go back to addressing other pain points. This is a shorter version of how I would lay out the issue, but go in depth as much as you want. We have a lot of CSS inside supports to cater for IE11 users. This makes changes really time-consuming and prone to errors. Is IE11 still a browser we support? Yeah, so I had a look. Looks like we haven't had a single visitor using IE11 in the past 6 months. Oh, no. Well, no wonder, right? So let's remove it then. And then they say the worst thing I hear, which is, give me a time estimate. I was like, oh, man. Good question. Let me think about it and get back to you. It's happening in a lot of features, so we will also need to test them all. Okay, let me know when you have a time estimate, but it might be a while until we have time to book, in a sprint to book all the time needed. We love a big refactor and we feel so special when we see those big numbers on the files change tab on GitHub, but the world doesn't spin around us, and big changes imply big testing. And this may also be a project that only gets a few allocated hours per month, so it's not really feasible. So you may have to reword things and try again. In this case, the suggestion actually comes from the product person. So in that case, instead of doing it all in one go, let's attach that work to when we're working on those features. So that testing is included instead of doing general regression testing. So changes that need a big general regression testing impact everyone. So increase your chance of getting your refactor approved by attaching it to be aligned with planned feature development. Or so, who knows, holiday periods, slow business developments, or new team onboarding. Product people prefer refactors to rebuilds, and so this is like a few other things to have in mind when you're having these conversations. Is there metrics to track CSS-related bugs reaching user acceptance testing? Have you documented development roadblocks, slowness due to the need of a refactor? Can you demonstrate how the current CSS impacts feature development? Has this been documented to the product team before? Do you have visibility of the product roadmap? If so, are there upcoming features that might be affected or benefit from a refactor? Are you able to share how the lack of a refactor impacts your time estimates? Would this help the product person plan their sprints with more predictability and confidence? I love this blog post. Not blog post, sorry. This book is amazing. I love reading it. Don't procrastinate. Messes only grow with time. You can easily make excuses and hold off on doing something until the conditions are right or things seem stable. Perfection isn't possible, but progress is. And it can be really intimidating to approach a product team. As someone who has experience working in a massive, enormous company with hundreds of developers where only some voices are heard, it can be a very frustrating experience too. So don't be discouraged to document your experience and the things and your opinions, because it doesn't mean it has to go to a product person. People, your allies could be just your actual teammates, your team leader or your engineering manager. So you've waited and you figure out the pain points and what's a priority from a developer perspective. And you got the green light from the product owner to carry on and do the work. So here's some bits I've kept in mind recently. So Harry Roberts wrote and gave some talks about CSS refactoring nearly 10 years ago, and they still hold on to their practicality. And Harry calls them the refactoring tunnels, and the idea is to refactor component by component or feature in isolation, and keep a temporary CSS file where you allow overrides to exist on the new refactored components, and then you delete those overrides once you tackle the higher level utilities that are causing the need for said overrides. This temporary file can be called anything. They used the example of defend.css, but it doesn't really matter. But this, I found this the most helpful and hopeful way to tackle a big CSS refactor in one go. But personally, I rather go component by component, and don't make it a massive feature, massive big deal, massive sprint out of it. So let's think about how we can do that. So I'm the first to admit that I still get caught up on naming things and then regretting it. I mean, naming things is the hardest thing in development, as we all know. My brain sometimes is on autopilot, and I take the designs a tiny bit too literally. And it wouldn't be unusual for my daily work to style the typical card block. We love a card block. And from the designs, you can see that there's a card style for articles and another card style for people. And the approach for this may be to break them into two, put all the shared styles in one CSS class, and then call one of them card event and another one called card person, and it's great. You deliver the website, some great content, you put some fake content, you put a fake team page so they can see how they can use it, and it's glorious and beautiful, and then it goes live, and bam! That's what happens. Turns out the person card block managed to fit another need that wasn't really specified. They are using it for animals and for sponsoring animals and things like that. It's really, the card person doesn't make a lot of sense anymore. So think about how a feature will evolve is exactly what Josh Tumath said in his talk, How We Keep Going Wrong, Roundabouts and APIs at State of the Browser earlier this year. It's fantastic. You should go watch it. And regardless of the reason why a refactor is being done, use that opportunity to make your life easier in the future is a great idea. I particularly love this example that Josh shared. Booleans can restrict you once you need to go beyond a true or a false. So that's a great example, because if you wanted to add a sepia theme, you had to create a new one because you were stuck with dark mode, true or false. But if you have an enum, you can just add an extra theme name for it. So once we figure out how to name things, we can go one step forward and move on from the idea of using the class property as the only way to represent the state of an object. And this can also depend on the project, obviously, that you're working on. But I personally would like to move on. But what is this type of card? And use a data attribute to filter them by types. And, or a better example, a progress bar. Styling based on the value of the data attribute makes your life easier when you're updating the status of something via JavaScript and removes the need to add or remove CSS classes. Imagine like, if you were to change, you'll probably be adding classes, and then you like, check if class is there, then remove class, or do use a JavaScript toggle. And it just removes the need for it. This fantastic blog post from Keith Circle is they go in depth on why they think this approach is quite reasonable. And if you go back to the cars example, the article also includes the following example, which I quite like, and I quote, attribute selectors like attribute tilde value allow you to treat the value as if you were a list. Sorry, I'm rushing because I see the time going by. This can be useful when you want flexibility in styling parts of a component, such as applying a style to one or more border size. I didn't know about this. But if you use a data attribute, whatever it is, you can add more than one value. And on your CSS, if you use the tilde value, it knows how to pick up more than one. I personally find it more readable, and I can keep a few things a little bit more separate and more digestible for me personally. The other thing is, like, if you go back to a file, embrace logical properties, because automated translations are here to stay. Every week we keep getting asked to add automate tools that automatically translate the website. But if you're using the old paddings or margins or anything that goes aside, the moment you add a right to left language, things don't work as nicely as they could be. So adding logical properties and values really helps fix that problem for you. The browser will do it for you. It's great. And we can go. Do you remember the massive amounts of media queries? Maybe we don't need to use them anymore. We can replace them completely with CSS functions. Or this is also the opportunity to, if you have a media query that is changing the font size, just font clamp and and a lot more that is out there. If you got a small task on a component, regardless if it is CSS related or not, take that opportunity to give specificity issues some love. Yes. Nested classes give us a visual hierarchy that is satisfying to our brains, but they don't really need it, because if the elements have their own class name, you're not really overriding something. You don't have to nest them just because it looks pretty on your editor. And if a component is being fully tested because of an unrelated CSS feature, increase the time estimate just a tiny bit to include that CSS maintenance, because testing is included. You get that for free. And this is also the time to move on, as we know, from pixels to rems instead, where font sizes are being set, use logical properties, etc. Take that opportunity to clean up that. It's probably a small CSS file anyways. Just take that opportunity to bring it to 2025. What about automated testing? We've moved on from the era of pixel-perfect design to fluid adapted designs that respond to the user's needs, devices, and accessibility preferences. So this is quite a challenge for traditional visual regression testing, because they may not work that way. Even if you include thresholds, it may not be the best use of resources and budget for small organizations, unless you have a very, very specific product that really needs this. So in my opinion, individual manual component testing is still, in my experience, the best for these types of problems. So imagine a faulty boiler, a faulty tap, grimy covered handles, and a drafty window being components of your website that eventually got some love and sit tightly with everything else. And sure, around the edges, some extra love is needed, but the pain points were fixed. It's all about progress, not perfection. Writing tidy and non-chaotic CSS is a skill that I have to work on every day, and a skill that you can work on by going back and mending, not just building brand new from scratch. A lot of people think that using a framework removes the need to work on a skill, but you're only adding risk rather than mitigating. And trust me, you already have enough risks trying to run npm install. CSS simply works. Use it. Thank you so much. 40 seconds left. Yes.